Namaskar to all of you, and thank you for being here. This is a series on Sri Aurobindo's book, Synthesis of Yoga, and last few talks have been on the section in this book called Jnana Yoga, or Yoga of Integral Knowledge. The first chapter in this section was called The Object of Knowledge, through which Sri Aurobindo sets the tone or the paradigm for this whole section, because the meaning of Jnana Yoga, or the object of knowledge, what are we seeking to know in Jnana Yoga, the meanings can be different. Very often, what we are seeking in Jnana Yoga is the truth of life, and very often the truth of life is understood as divine in its absolute form, which is formless and beyond this universe. And when that becomes our seeking, eventual seeking, then the eventual outcome of Jnana Yoga is moksha, or a liberation from the cycle of birth and death. But Sri Aurobindo draws our attention towards another object of knowledge, which is the tapas shakti, or a deep dynamic will in the depths or the deepest part of our being, which is ever connected to this supreme, absolute, transcendent divine beyond this universe also, and yet is dynamic in guiding us in our every moment's action. Very often in Jnana Yoga, because buddhi is the primary door through which we seek the divine truth or the jnana, buddhi is thought to be the leader of our journey in Jnana Yoga. But Sri Aurobindo here again points out to the sadhak that buddhi is at best a scout or a pioneer. The actual leader of the journey is the tapas shakti, a deep dynamic will inside us, which plants this curiosity in the buddhi, which plants this craving in the heart, and plants this desire to seek something beyond this world in the vital. So the object of knowledge in yoga of integral knowledge is this deep dynamic will, the discovery of this deep dynamic will, tapas shakti, through which one can be in this world in the here and now and fulfill oneself, because one is guided by this tapas shakti towards our sadharma, what best we can do in the present moment, what best we can do in the present context in the life, yet at the same time experience the dynamic moksha, where one feels liberated because one feels that conscious connection with this tapas shakti, which is ever connected to that supreme divine beyond this universe. So this first chapter sets the tone for the entire section, and subsequently the previous chapter, which was about purified understanding, and this chapter, which is about concentration, and the next chapter, which is about renunciation or vairagya, all three are describing some parts of the process of seeking after this tapas shakti, the discovery of this tapas shakti. And purification and concentration, these are two essential elements and also two inseparable elements in this process. If we look at the analogy of an onion peel or peeling an onion, then peeling petal by petal every part of the onion is like purification. Peeling off the layer of desires in the vital, which is seeking out for pleasure, is purified into enjoying what is there in the here and now, in the present moment. Peeling off the impurities in the heart, where again there is love with attachment, seeking out for love, purified into a deep, calm, intense love, which is more self-giving. Purification or peeling off the senses to open them up, to be receptive to the here and now and not influence the buddhi with its own cyclical patterns and sensory desires. Peeling off the layer of desire in seeking knowledge to being content, flexible, and open to receiving the higher light. So this purification is what we talked about in the last chapter. So in the onion, one part is, on one hand, it is about peeling these layers and purifying ourselves. But on the other hand, it is also important, if we see the center of the onion as the tapas shakti, then to have our focus at the center, to hold the aspiration in our being to get in touch with this tapas shakti, to hold the aspiration to come face to face with this tapas shakti. And it may not happen in one day, but in the present moment, to be able to feel the best possible presence of the Divine Mother in our life is what we will call as concentration, or focus on the center of the onion. And if we look at it, both of them are complementary to each other and essential to each other. If there is no purification, then concentration is very difficult. Our mind will go in all places. And if there is no concentration, if there is no intense seeking or aspiration towards the center, then the peeling will not be motivated enough. And also, if we look at purification like a process of clearing ourselves and making ourselves receptive, if it is not followed immediately by concentration, then we reaccumulate that dirt of attachments and desires again into our being. It's like if meditation is purification, if during action in the day our concentration is not at the center of this tapas shakti, then eventually we reaccumulate the same things over again in the day. So purification and concentration are like the yin and yang, the feminine and the masculine, and they carry, purification carries concentration within itself, and concentration carries purification within itself. They are complementary, they are inseparable on the journey of yoga. Now, looking a bit deeper into what is concentration, what is this chapter about, what is the experience like of concentration? What do we refer to when we say concentration? Does it refer to exclusive concentration on one object to the exclusion of everything else. What is the process of concentration like? What is the highest possibility of concentration? These are some of the questions we can explore. And in our exploration, the first thing to look at is the power of concentration. What does concentration bring to us? Concentration is a power through which one can know anything, one can acquire anything, and one can become anything. If we look at when we get one-pointed and concentrated on any subject, then we can pierce through that subject and it reveals to us the deeper secrets of that subject. And it is something we all would have experienced even just reading a book. If our mind is all over the place and if we are concentrated, then those same words mean differently to us. So this is the first power of concentration, which is the power to know, to pierce through and reveal the deeper meanings of any subject. The second power of concentration is the power to acquire. When our will becomes one-pointed, we become one-willed with full faith, sufficiently motivated and determined, then that concentration can help us acquire and achieve anything in life. And again, the same power of concentration, when put to any value, be it love, be it courage, be it purity, and when we concentrate on that value, then we become one with that value. We become love. We become purity. So these three powers, which we all use commonly in our day-to-day life to different degrees, is put to use in yoga conventionally to discover the divine truth. And conventionally, as we just discussed, the seeking after the divine truth eventually becomes very often into seeking after the truth, which is that the ultimate truth is that the divine is beyond this universe. That is the Sat, and this is the Mithya. And even if we talk about the most revered texts about concentration, about dhyana, dharana and samadhi, where the process starts with dhyana or focusing on one thing, and dharan, holding that thing, and then it eventually takes us to samadhi, which is again beyond this universe in the transcendent. If we look at the symbol of Om, A in the Om representing the waking state, O in the Om representing the dream state, and Ma in Om representing the deep sleep state. And all these three represent the different states of consciousness a yogi can find himself in. It can be understood a bit better scientifically from the perspective of EEG and ECG. We all know of ECG, which is like putting wires on your heart and measuring the electrical activity in the heart. EEG is a process through which you put wires on the brain and measure the electrical activity in your head. So we find the head electrical activity behaving in three different ways. Apart from beta waves, which are like very restless state, there's an alpha state where we are in the waking state, the ah of the Om, where we are calm in the waking state. Then there is the theta brain wave, where the electrical activity gets slower. We are kind of in a middle of the sleep. We are entering into sleep. We are in a dream phase. And then there is the delta brain wave, which is even slower, where we are in deep sleep, where our body goes through its maximum healing. We are not dreaming in that state. There is an absolute silence in our being. But one will not say there is an entire unconsciousness, because when we wake up, we have some idea, did I have a deep sleep or not? If we had a deep sleep, we know. So there is still an awareness standing back. And that is what happens to all yogis, that very often in science it's been shown that many great yogis are people who, even in their waking state, their EEG brain waves are in delta. So they are in such a deep healing state, deep state, which normally puts any individual into a deep sleep. A yogi can stay fully awake in that state. And that is a conscious connection with the transcendent divine, what it brings to a yogi. So coming back to, we were talking about concentration and what conventional seeking is in concentration. Eventually, it leads towards the transcendent, and even the symbol of Om, eventually we are seeking through it the transcendent divine. But Sri Aurobindo here points out that the aim of integral yoga is not to excise the consciousness of universe and the individual self in the process of concentrating upon the transcendent. So there has to be something more to the process of concentration. Sri Aurobindo, in one of the other chapters, one line that I love to quote is, he talks about that life seems outward and distracting only until one has not found the oneness between the consciousness and self with Supreme. So he points out here, if we are trying to concentrate and if outer life seems distracting, if we are doing Ram, 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 and if outer things seem distracting, that means we haven't yet discovered the oneness between consciousness and self with Supreme. We'll come to the meaning of this more, but there is a possibility of concentration where our outer life is also inclusive in it. And Sri Aurobindo describes this as, we shall seek, therefore, not only the ineffable. Ineffable refers to the one that cannot be described, the formless beyond. We shall seek, therefore, not only the ineffable, but also his manifestation as infinite being, consciousness, and bliss. Infinite being representing the Sat, consciousness representing the Chit, and bliss representing the Ananda. So as infinite being consciousness is bliss, Satchidananda, embracing the universe and at play in it. So we are not only seeking the ineffable, but we are seeking the Satchidananda and its manifestation and its play in it. It is an all-inclusive concentration that we seek in integral yoga. For that triune infinity refers to Satchidananda, is His supreme manifestation. And that we shall aspire to know, to share in, and to become. And since we seek to realize this Trinity not only in itself, but in its cosmic play. So of that ineffable, the supreme manifestation is Satchidananda. And we seek to realize that and it in play in the cosmic manifestation. Now these are again deep words, and they tell us something about concentration, that concentration in a way, this manifestation which Aurobindo talks about here, the cosmic play and the Satchidananda manifesting in our lower nature. When we talk about concentration in our lower nature, which is in the body, vital, and the mind, even our concentration in the here and now is an image of a higher divine concentration. There is a higher divine concentration, and there is a concentration that we all have in our day-to-day life. If we look at how we concentrate on things in our day-to-day life, we all gather our consciousness, our will, different parts of our self into one, and we become one-pointed. And we hold our energy in that one-pointedness. And when it is sufficiently gathered, then we can put this energy to use in manifesting or creating anything. So that is how we concentrate or can concentrate in our day-to-day life. Now this concentration is an image of a higher divine concentration. For the divine, the highest supreme divine self gathers itself into one, all its cells into one, and from that space, holding itself into that oneness, it spontaneously generates and creates new ideas, new things, new actions, and it generates them spontaneously. And this is important to understand, because when we are trying to understand any subject, and here the subject is concentration, it's good to be able to look at the highest possibility of concentration. So the divine gathers itself into one and spontaneously manifests ideas, things, new creation into this cosmic world. It is also important to understand, because in our usual day-to-day life, when we are acting, we feel that we need to plan, we need to think things through, we need to go through the struggle of life, we feel that action emerges from the field of action. Action or thought or goals emerge from the field of thought. But actually, if we look at this divine concentration, where the divine gathers oneself into one, the actual things and ideas and manifestation is emerging out of an absolute silence. So it draws our attention towards the two possibilities that we have. One is that we can navigate life through struggle and basing our action on previous action, or we can look at a possibility of merging with this divine concentration, with this absolute silence, from which the action emerges spontaneously. Yes, it is a very far off thought for maybe all of us, but still it is a possibility. And as I said, that any subject we seek to understand and master, it's good to look at its highest possibility. And this sets the background for us to look at the most beautiful lines in this chapter, which may not be so easy to understand, but we can feel these words. So Sri Aurobindo writes that being dwelling in consciousness upon itself for bliss, this is the divine tapas. Being dwelling in consciousness upon itself for bliss, this is the divine tapas. And a knowledge will dwelling in the force of consciousness on itself and its manifestation is the essence of the divine concentration. So these words are quite deep and challenging to understand, but one can feel them, repeat them, meditate upon them, and they gradually reveal some of the meaning they carry within them. But maybe when we go back home and read these words, one thing that will repeatedly come to us is when we read these words, it puts our being into a concentrated space. If one has to take an analogy to understand, no analogy would do justice, because these are words which connect us to the supramental in a way. But if we have to take an analogy to get some meaning to this, the first lines that Sri Aurobindo says is being dwelling in consciousness upon itself for bliss. This is the divine tapas. So one can see being as a physical being, God as a physical being, dwelling in consciousness, which we can see like a lake. So this physical being is dwelling into a lake of water upon itself. So it's dwelling upon itself, it's seeing its own reflection. The Sat is dwelling upon Chit, which is like a lake, upon itself, the truth, and loving it. And in process, there is bliss, there is Ananda. Sat dwelling in Chit upon itself for bliss. This is the divine tapas. And then a knowledge will dwelling in force of consciousness on itself and its manifestations. So knowledge will here represents in this lake of consciousness that intelligence, that intelligent will, and dwelling in force of consciousness. So now this lake takes up the shape of a force or a pouring power which pours into this universe. So this intelligent will dwelling in this pouring consciousness or pouring water and its manifestation, which represents the water, the shower of manifestation, the rain of manifestation. So the intelligence, the knowledge will dwelling on that force of consciousness and the manifestation is the essence of divine concentration. So this divine concentration is up there in the absolute as well, in the consciousness as well, in the force as well, and seated within every being as well. So it not just dwells upon itself in a self-gathered state, it manifests, it maintains the manifestation, and it possesses the manifestation as well. So if we look at it from our perspective, this we are looking from the top, from the divine perspective. But from our perspective, this concentration will not be limited to one individual. Unlike our mind, which if it has to focus on one thing, it has to focus on it to the exclusion of other things. This concentration will be possessing every being. So this concentration will be present, divine concentration within every being as well, and beyond every being in the force of consciousness, and in the intelligence of the divine, and the consciousness, and the Sat Chit Ananda. Again, it's a supreme possibility, challenging to understand and feel, but it gives us some glimpse of what is the highest possibility of concentration. And now, having understood the importance of inclusivity in concentration and what is the highest possibility of concentration, now let's look at what is the process of concentration that Sri Aurobindo suggests that one can follow. Because it is not just about one thing we lose our focus in, and it's not the meaning of samadhi and concentration for us has to become richer. So, one process that Sri Aurobindo recommends, and of course, which is common to many different processes of concentration, is to hold the mind in its unwavering state onto a stream of connected thought on any subject without any distraction. So it's a stream of connected thought which we all need to hold in concentration. But in yoga, the concentration is not on some outward object. It is inward. So it is easier for all of us to have a connected thought on an outer object. But when we look to go inwardly, very often the trap we discover is the intellectual whys and hows. Let's say we sit down to focus on our breath, then very often we go into the breath and we're trying to focus on our breath, but intellectual thoughts may start coming. Am I breathing the right way? Where is the breath coming from? What is happening to the breath? Is it smooth? All kinds of judgments, all kinds of thoughts, the whys and the hows start coming in. But here Sri Aurobindo says that when we concentrate inwardly, we concentrate on the essence of any subject. And this is a very beautiful word. We concentrate on the essence. And on the essence of an object, we can concentrate in two ways. One is that it immediately reveals through concentration the fruitful essence of it. Like Sri Aurobindo writes that, thus, if it be the divine love that is the subject of our concentration, we are concentrating on love, divine love, it is on the essence of the idea of God as love that the mind should concentrate in such a way that the various manifestations of the divine love should arise luminously, not only to the thought, but in the heart and being and vision of sadhak. So, we concentrate on the essence of the divine love, and eventually it has to reveal not only in the mind but in the heart. What does divine love mean? In the vital, what is the experience of divine love to us? And applying it in the breath analogy, when we go inwardly, let's say we start focusing on a breath and all these thoughts start to come into us, it's a moment to remind to ourselves that our focus is meant to be on the essence of breath. And when we shift our attention to the essence of breath, it will very quickly lead us to the source of breath. And the breath will gradually start becoming illuminating to the mind, to the heart, and to the vital. So, the focus has to be on the essence, and we need to be vigilant of how our meaning, our mind, what wants to take meaning to any kind of concentration is contemplation around beating around the bushes of that topic. But the actual concentration is on the essence. So we need to remind ourselves to go to the essence of the topic. Same about Nam Japa or any mantra. We can go on saying Ram, 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 Om Namah Shivaya. But one can, Sri Aurobindo remarks in many different texts that one can hold in one's awareness any particular value or divine value, whether Shiva represents to us purity or whatever, or Ram represents to us sadhana or love or courage. And one can hold that value and an aspiration towards that value, and knowing that value fully in the whole being as the aspiration, and seeking that essence of the mantra. And when with that aspiration we do the japa, then it reveals to us much more deeply, and the concentration becomes more inclusive. There is another way of concentration that Sri Aurobindo suggests in this chapter. So one is this process of focusing on the essence and revealing itself in every part of the being. The second process is that when we focus on essence, very often for a sadhak, one may end up in samadhi. So dhyan, dharana and samadhi. So through the focus on essence, one goes up towards the transcendent divine into a silence. But here Sri Aurobindo remarks that it doesn't have to end there at the level of samadhi. It doesn't have to be a truncated possession of the Supreme Divine. One has to call down upon this higher silence or higher force to take a hold of our lower being, so that it can again illuminate the whole of our lower being. And then only it becomes into an integral process and not just going into samadhi. So one is holding on to the essence in the here and now, and it revealing itself like a flowering of a flower, of a bud, or it can be going into samadhi and calling down that light to illuminate the whole being. The third process of concentration that Sri Aurobindo suggests is where one doesn't really make too much effort towards concentration, where one tries to bring the mind into stillness, where one takes up the witness position, stands back from the mind, not trying to interfere with the mind, and just observes the ups and downs and the mind going in its circles. Initially, when we are trying to witness, the mind revolts and it amplifies its thoughts. So it becomes into a cyclone going round and round. But if we can stay there and keep witnessing without interfering, gradually it settles down into stillness. Another way Sri Aurobindo suggests to still the mind is to discover a peace behind the mind. As we pierce the mind, behind the mind there is a certain peace. To hold on to that peace and reject any thought suggestions. And it is another beautiful process, because very often, even if we are trying to focus on the essence of a subject, the thoughts are so deceiving and influencing. We think we are focusing on the essence, but we again get lost in our thoughts. But when we hold on to that peace and pretty much reject all thought suggestions, and we allow the mind to still itself entirely, then what happens is that in that silence, it's easier for the mind to perceive the absolute Brahman or that supreme divine, the silence. So it becomes more palpable, and our intention gathers more power. And through that intention, one can bring in that little bit of light to our lower being. And when that light comes to the lower being, it is the whole being gets to a degree concentrated. And then, when with this concentrated being, there is a possibility of calling upon the tapas shakti or the higher divine mother to come down and take hold of the whole being at every layer of human consciousness. So in this process, one is not focusing on anything in the mind, but stilling down the mind and holding on to the peace behind the mind. And from there, the silent Brahman becomes more palpable. Our intention gathers strength. We bring light to our own being. And then from there, one calls down this tapas shakti to truly illuminate and take hold of our nature. So these are various forms of concentration that Sri Aurobindo describes. But I think, again, concentration has to take its own way for all of us. We are all unique in our own ways, and we all need to discover what works for us when it comes to concentration. But Sri Aurobindo in this chapter emphasizes some common things which we all need to have. We need to be clear about the purpose of concentration. That it doesn't have to be exclusive, it has to be inclusive. It doesn't have to excise the consciousness of the universe out of it. So we need to be clear of the intention and the purpose behind concentration. One may say the purpose is for the good of all. Sarve bhavantu sukhina. So the primary purpose has to be clear, that it is more inclusive. And another thing which just very simply helps is to have an open heart. Wherever we choose to concentrate, it's almost essential to have an open heart, and that is a part of the process of purification. So Sri Aurobindo describes concentration in this chapter, but purification is a bystander or has to go on side by side. And one of the part of purification is an open heart. Love with calmness, with depth, with openness, which is quite essential. So these are some simple tips that Sri Aurobindo offers, or some reflections on the process of concentration for the sadhaks. Just to summarize, we went through the chapter first looking at the object of knowledge on the path of Jnana Yoga. Then we looked at how purification and concentration are the feminine and masculine, the yin and yang, and they're inseparable. They go hand in hand. And if at this moment we can also talk about that, even though we talked at length about concentration, but in the larger view of things, it is only one part of the process of yoga. Purification and concentration are followed by liberation, which is followed by perfection, which is followed by divine delight. So purification and concentration represent the first step. Eventually, the whole thing becomes spontaneous on the path of yoga. But these two steps, along with the next chapter, which is about renunciation, are some key first steps on the path of yoga. And then we talked about the need for inclusivity in concentration rather than exclusivity. Then we looked at the supreme possibility of concentration, which is beautifully put down in words, just like Savitri. These 3 lines in this chapter of synthesis of yoga, in the chapter concentration, these 3-4 lines are lines over which one can dwell upon again and again and again. And then we looked at some of the various different processes one can follow in concentration, where the key words was focusing on the essence. And if one goes into samadhi, calling down upon the light. Or the third possibility of concentration, of stilling the mind, and from there gathering energy in one's intention. Thank you. Yes, please. Yeah.
Is there any science behind concentration or psychic power? Let me substantiate myself. Suppose I have deep passion or concentration for violin. So I am meeting people who are good in violin without any effort. I am there to buy vegetable. I am not saying anything about violin or music. And I am meeting some violinist in short span of time, and it is happening frequently. So some people call it law of attraction. So has it anything to do with concentration or intense passion or thinking or brain power, psychic power? You can give any name. This is my question. Two questions.
Yeah, thank you. So I think you answered your question through the word law of attraction. And Sri Aurobindo himself remarks at the beginning of the chapter that concentration is a power through which we can know anything, acquire anything, and become anything. So when we are intensely focusing on anything with passion, with a strong interest towards it, then naturally we draw those things towards ourselves. In terms of energy, it's like attracts like, or we are like transmitters, and we are transmitting a certain frequency into the universe, and we end up entraining with or attracting similar frequencies towards ourselves. So that is pretty much you answered your own question. But in the subject of here also Sri Aurobindo remarks here that here we are putting that same concentration for a different use. And another scientific understanding of concentration is in terms of left and right brain resonance, where in the left brain we find ourselves in our intellectual contemplation. In right brain we are more in the visuospatial or creative aspect of our brain, whereas concentration is a very light space where both the right and left brain they are in absolute resonance. And when you talk about violin or any kind of an artistic field which makes use of the right brain, it brings an immense concentration along with it. So that passion, that heart coming into it, the right brain coming into it, gives it that added power and passion which enhances the law of attraction. But again, coming back here, it's about bringing the concentration on something else. Thank you. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah, Sarve Santu Niramaya, Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu, Ma Kaschid Dukhamahag Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Dr. Bishlani, would you like to add something?
Seems a little incongruous to speak after the closing mantra Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah. I'll be very brief. Concentration is basically a time and energy saving device. We have all seen that the same thing can be done in a much shorter time if we really concentrate. Starting with simple things like getting ready after we are up in the morning. What this in the army, in the soldiers' language, shit, shave and shower. Now, that routine itself uh, can take anything from half an hour to 2 hours, depending upon the state of concentration. Of course, I mean, if we add more detail to it, improve the quality of that getting ready in terms of the Ayurvedic Dincharya, then some increase in the time required is legitimate. But the content of that preparation remaining the same, still it can take a widely varying amount of time without affecting the quality of the preparation if we concentrate. So if we concentrate, we can do it in a much shorter time. Athletes realize that as they undergo the training, they can run faster without getting tired, because they gradually learn which are the muscles which need not work while they are running. So they use only those muscles which are really required, and to the extent they are required, in the most efficient way. And that's how they can run faster and at the same time get less tired. While reading, of course, we have all noticed that if we read with concentration, we can read the same number of pages in less time and actually get more from those pages if we are concentrating. So it's basically a time and energy saving device. Now, what applies to these mundane activities also applies to the spiritual path. If we are focused on what we want to do, we concentrate on it. So it's basically that. And on the spiritual path, what becomes important is to keep out, to be able to concentrate properly, the distracting elements, the impurities. And therefore, this purification should also precede and to some extent continue while we are concentrating. And that's why you find that in the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, if you take the 8 limbs, there were 8 limbs. It's not that they have to be done in a sequential manner. That is, when the first limb is complete, then only you go to the second limb. That's not the intention. And that's why they are not called 8 steps. They are called the 8 limbs or the anga. So the first 2 are yama and niyama. Yama or niyama are essentially the do's and don'ts, which would lead to purification. So that comes before those parts of the Ashtanga, the 8 limbs, which give us the essence of the method of concentration and or meditation. Meditation and concentration are often used synonymously, but if we look at it in terms of the process, starting with the asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and the product samadhi, in that sense, this process has much wider implications than just concentration. The concentration literally is the dharana part. That element is concentration. But then the self-purification through the yamas and niyamas comes before this process. And that's how we can understand the significance. Another thing which Mankul mentioned was that there can be a stage at which, without making any special effort, we can concentrate on what we do, that is, bring all our knowledge which we have and the acquisition of that knowledge into action without losing awareness of the whole, which means that the rest is not disappearing. That is the divine concentration. Now, the divine itself has done it. It's aware of everything and yet is manifesting in a limited way in the universe. So, when that wider awareness and that narrow focus both become simultaneous, it is what approaches the divine consciousness. And this is something which Aurobindo has referred to in the Life Divine as the comprehending consciousness and the apprehending consciousness. Comprehending is comprehensive, all-inclusive, and same time also an apprehending consciousness, that part which has been focused on and implemented for a limited purpose. So in that sense, at that level, concentration becomes a process of deliberate self-limitation of the concentration. And to simplify this complex idea of the comprehending and the apprehending consciousness of the divine, which an advanced seeker can approach, let me take an example. Monidipa is sitting next to me. She has come here to sing a few devotional songs during the satsang. Now, she has she knows maybe a few hundred songs. But then for this morning, she selected only a few. Now, that wider awareness of those hundreds of songs that she knows does not disappear. That can coexist simultaneously with the few that she selected to sing today. So all the songs that she knows is the comprehending aspect, and this few she selected for singing this morning is the apprehending aspect. So that is what, so both can exist simultaneously. So that is the type of higher awareness which we can aim at through the process of yoga.